some of the problems, but there are some good things happening as well. And I just want to spend the next sort of 10-15 minutes talking about some of the work that we're doing and other people are doing as well. And the first thing I just wanted to talk about, first of all, counter communications. Because if it is a battle of communications, it is a battle of propaganda, it is a battle of, you know, whether we live in or not, we live in this kind of world. We live in a world where people are able to get information quickly and people believe things very quickly, and we need to counter them as a civil society. This is where the battlefield, in inverted commas, is now. So really, start earlier. You know, yes, I guess for most of you guys, you have students probably 18 years old plus, but a conversation we were having just now in break, and my wife teaches in a primary school, and in the UK, we are starting earlier. We are starting to inoculate from a safeguarding perspective. You know, I go into schools, my staff go into schools, lots of other people go into schools, have these conversations, mentor young kids, help them express their grievances, help them build this identity, because we have to dissect, counter, but also provide the alternatives that we, from human rights platforms, from liberal secular democracy, the kind of community societies we want to build, create the identities, so start earlier, understand the difference between violent and non-violent extremism, and understand that they're both problematic. One is something, the violence, extremism is what the law should be looking after. The non-violence is what we, civil society, should be really focusing in on. And really understand who our target audience is. Talk the language of our audience. I just want a couple of more interesting statistics. In the UK, I mentioned the percentage of people that have been to university that are convicted Islamist terrorists here in the UK. More than 10, and I can't remember what the exact number is, but I know it's more than 10 now, of the convicted Islamist terrorists in the UK were presidents of Islamic societies at universities. So they didn't just go to universities, they were responsible for recruiting other people as well. And on top of that, there are active, safe place in inverted commas that safe places that people in universities are trying to create. I was no platformed. I remember I was going to Warwick University to speak about the rights of the LGBT community within Islam. And I was going to go there to talk about how, amongst the overwhelming majority of Muslim traditions, being gay is a sin. But across the Muslim world in the 1800s, it was decriminalised. It wasn't a crime from the Tanzimat reforms. And what happened was the one society, the LGBT something society in Warwick, no platformed me because they said I was Islamophobic. Even though I was going there to talk about how they should have more rights. And what they did was they basically read something on the internet written by Hizb ut-Tahrir or Al-Qaeda or somebody, some rubbish about me, and said I was Islamophobic. So be aware that these safe places are starting to come into universities as well. But start earlier, know your target. So what are we doing? We're actually deconstructing and have deconstructed the strategies of propaganda that the Islamists are using, ISIS are using, Al-Qaeda are using, and we've reversed engineered them. These slides are available, and there are 6 key operational points. The aims of the strategy really is to try and generate a connected echo chamber of influence which both directly and indirectly engages with individuals who could be vulnerable and steering them away from potential harm. Because at the end of the day, not only are these people harming others, I genuinely believe they're harming themselves as well. You know, not just by blowing themselves up, but if somebody becomes a bigot or somebody becomes xenophobic in any way whatsoever towards other Muslims or to people who are Jewish or people of colour or whatever, I believe that really, at a very, very base level, they're harming themselves as well. They could have a much better life, a much better quality of life, and get on in life doing and being a more effective member of society and have a better life themselves. Providing the alternative narrative, we have to understand what it is that we stand for as well. You know, it's no point in just deconstructing these narratives. What is it that we believe in? We've got to be very, very clear on that, and using partnerships and cooperating with other like-minded people and individuals That's our CV, strategic communications. I won't go into it too more. You can have that slide, and you can sort of, sort of digest it a little bit more. But in detail, that's what it is. These are the key elements of it. And all we're doing is reverse engineering what the Islamists are doing. And something else that came up in just the break as well, I think something that's very, very important. One of the things I mentioned very early on is this is a political ideology that is using a theological justification for its actions, for its xenophobia, for its bigotry, and for its jihadist, as opposed to jihad, activities. Some key points to remember. I heard somebody yesterday rightly say and present that anti-Semitism is alien to the Islamic traditions. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, actually, it's a hadith, which is a narration of him, says, narrate from the people of the Israelia, from his people who are of Israel. From there is goodness. The Ottomans took in the Ottoman Empire, one of the largest empires that happens to be Muslim, the last caliphate, in fact, who didn't impose a version of Sharia law, one version of Sharia law across its land. They took in people who were Jewish after the Spanish Inquisition. The concept of anti-Semitism is alien. The Mufti, and there's a great book, I think, that's going to be, hopefully, we can get together with ISGAP and yourself and maybe look at some original research on a Mufti Amin, who I believe was one of the key people that brought anti-Semitism into the Middle East, the Muslim world, until it was 1920s or whenever it was, somewhere around there. But for me, another key moment is when the Muslim Brotherhood, who call themselves Islamists, we haven't made this word up, they call themselves Islamists. The Muslim Brotherhood were expelled from Egypt. They were intellectuals, they were smart people. They were expelled from Egypt because they were trying to assassinate the dictator at the time and wanting to create this caliphate. And they found refuge in Saudi Arabia. And what we had was this potent mixture of the Wahhabi Salafi theology that I mentioned needs to have an enemy. It needs to have an other. And for them, when they first started, it was the Ottomans. So this theological version of Islam, which was very, very small in those days. Most Muslims aren't Salafi. And this political exodus, this exodus of these political ideologues, the Muslim Brotherhood, who merged in Saudi Arabia, basically, without meaning to sound too flippant, the House of Saud were Bedouins who were warriors who managed to conquer Hijaz and set up Saudi Arabia. British had a hand in that, allowing them to have Saudi Arabia and create Saudi Arabia. Had to have an enemy. Bedouins tribe, the intellectuals came along. The merger of the two is a key moment. Why do I say it's a key moment? Because the Muslim Brotherhood is heavily influenced by Amin. Sayyid Qutb and Hassan al-Banna, the ideologues, another interesting book you must read if you haven't read it already, it's called Milestones by Sayyid Qutb. He is the ideologue for modern day Islamism. And basically we had this political ideology, this political anti-Semitic, utopian Islamist creating ideology, which is very, very minute, very small, go into Saudi Arabia, find refuge, merge with this Salafi theology, and that's one of the key moments of modern day contemporary extremism within the Muslim traditions. What happened was they set up 3 organizations to spread this around the world. One was the OIC, the other one was the World Assembly for Muslim Youth, and the third one was the Muslim World League, or sometimes called the Rabita Trust. And through that, they spread money around the world, and in an open source CIA document, the CIA reckoned that just Saudi Arabia on its own, and be very careful, they've invited me to come and speak there in November, but the truth is the truth, the CIA reckoned that Saudi Arabia has spent over $100 billion just on its own propagating this particular theology and ideology. Petrodollars have spread this around the world. Go to Indonesia, people haven't got money, let's look after them. Islamist organisations look after them. These three organisations are Islamist, OIC, WAMI and Muslim World League, but they're also government, state institutions within Saudi Arabia. So, this is the sort of the strategy that we've reversed engineered, and it's happening, it's taking place. There are partners around the world that are involved in this. Another thing that we're doing is something called TERA, which is the EU funding, and it has been, is to develop toolkits. And Charles, I'm happy to share this with ISGAP and with anyone else, is, because we own it, we now own it, is on the right-hand side, to understand that if an individual is in the middle of those circles, that individual has contact with different people within society on a daily basis. And this includes people at universities. So we've developed a toolkit for lecturers and teachers and parents and journalists and a whole range of politicians, etc., which really focus on Professor McAdam's staircase model on the left-hand side, and really understanding the 5 different steps that somebody might take in becoming homophobic, anti-Semitic, but from an Islamist perspective, and then understanding and recognising what your behaviour within those steps, at any given step, can either help encourage somebody to move up or down. Let me give you an example on the lower step. If somebody within universities comes to you as a lecturer and says, I am the victim of racism, and that person happens to be Muslim, you've got a number of choices. One is you can ignore it, the other one you can go off on a rampage and support him wholeheartedly, or you could do the third thing, which is my advice. Assure that person that you will investigate. And after investigation, if it is shown that it definitely was a case of racism, help that person overcome and find solutions to that racism. But also, if it is very clearly not a case of racism, then also explain to the person why it isn't and help them overcome that particular course of action as well. Because if you don't, or behaving in a particular way can actually help them move up or down. So this is a staircase model and a toolkit that we've developed. Happy to share that toolkit with anybody who's interested. So that's taking place. There are people in the UK, there are people in Europe that have been teachers, university lecturers, police officers, policymakers, prison officers that are undergoing this training right now. And all it does is build on what you already know. There's nothing in there other than showing you what the signs are and helping you use your existing processes to behave in the right way. And then we have some campaigns. We have FATE, which is the Families Against Terrorism and Extremism, which was a European network that we launched in Paris in April, where we brought 120 people together, academics, scholars, families, people who've been affected, NGOs, by Islamist extremism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, bigotry, etc. Mothers of people who had their children have died. And these people didn't have the expertise and the skills to combat Islamist radicalisation, but they had access and reach within communities. We delivered, first of all, some skills to them, the expertise, but more than that, created a network by which, and a resource by which these people now are growing and operating and working together. So we managed to we started with about 10 organisations, we're currently up to 120. By the end of the year, we will be up to about 500. That's just in Europe. Some of the good news, maybe not for some of you, I don't know if any of you guys are here from North Africa, we've just got the go-ahead to do this in Tunisia and Morocco now as well. And it will culminate in a conference in Tunisia in November. Very ambitious, very large project. Tunisia has the highest number of foreign fighters that have gone to join ISIL, more than Saudi Arabia. So that's another project, another version of that. We're doing a lot of work in Australia. We've got the Quilliam University Societies. We've set up in the last academic year, now I think we're on 9 or 10 Quilliam Societies that are focused on human rights, secularism, democracy as a way, and combating a lot of these ideas that we talked about. But then even more than that, we started a Right to Debate campaign, which 19 universities have adopted so far, which means that at universities, currently, around the world, the UK, USA and other places, there are extremist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamist, Salafist, anti-Semitic preachers that are going onto university campuses, not breaking the law, they haven't broken the law, but are going on university campuses and indoctrinating our youngsters. They're not being challenged. What the Right to Debate campaign has started, and it will grow from strength, I think it will really grow big in September, is we're getting universities to sign up to the fact that if they want to have these people at their universities, bring them on. But also give an equal amount of time to people who have the opposite viewpoint. And if we believe that our ideas are good, let the battle of good ideas, let the battle of ideas take place. Rather than indoctrination, let the debate take place. Don't have these safe places. Nothing, provided you don't break the law and you don't incite hatred or violence to somebody who's off limits. Have the debate. So we've got that. We've got FemPower looking at the relationship between gender violence and extremism, because there is one. And we're about to launch in November in Europe the Alliance of Women Against Radicalisation and Extremism. Then we've got the Quilliam Creative Arts, which really is how do we take all the things we know and take it to the masses. Well, we had an art exhibition, we had spoken word, and currently we've got something called an Evening with Zaggies, which is taking place at the JW3 in London, which is an immersive theatre play. And the precept is that there's a Muslim and a Jewish person who've decided that they will set up a restaurant together. And it's all around the table, and the actors sit all around the table, and they bring their families with them. So all these things are put out on the table and discussed in a satirical, humorous way. And then we're working with people like Kofi Annan with the Extremely Together program, where we're setting up ambassadors around the world to look at combating some of these ideas. And that's just some of the campaigns that we're doing. Finally, I just want to show you a few videos, if I may. And these videos really, again, are focusing on some of the positives. The first one is a video that, I'll give you the background to this. I'll give you the background to this. We have a number of people that go into schools, and we have mentors, we have a number of classes, workshops that we run. And some of the things that youngsters told us were so shocking that we wanted to make a video for teachers and for parents. And we're using the words of the youngsters that they wrote down and they said, but actors, other kids are actually saying these things. Everything in here is before we started with them, at the end of it.
Right, can you talk about where you would like to go?
Femi,
on my holiday, I will go and kill gays because they are ugly.
I would like to burn those who disrespect the words of the Prophet.
This is me and my brother Kareem. We have raped and killed this girl because she was disobedient to us.
As someone who supports the Quilliam Foundation's work, we know this isn't the kind of world you'll want for our children. And you'll know all too well the results of radicalisation. But like us, you'll also know there's hope. That challenging those ideologies head-on can make a real difference. And you'll know that if we work together to stop that cycle of hate by encouraging and facilitating dialogue between communities and generations, we can heal divisions, dispel myths, and bring up a generation free from the misconceptions and mistakes their parents once made. So thank you for everything you've helped us achieve so far, from everyone at Quilliam. Because if we stand together, we can make sure our children really can.
These are the kids after the workshops now.
This is me and my sister eating ice creams at the beach.
Is it?
I like going to see my nanny and granddad. This is me cheering because Arsenal have beat Chelsea. Yay!
So before the workshops, they wanted to kill gays because they're unclean. Before the workshops, they wanted to disrespect women because they felt they were being disobedient. And this is why the work is so important, because we do have to start earlier. And I'll just show you one more and rather get into questions. This is really about how and what Islamists will say. And I think I showed this last year, but it's one that I think is worth looking at again. It's where we've been challenging Islamists in the media. And this is our chairman and myself just having debates with people. And just look at the response from Islamists who are not jihadists and how they behave and how they refuse to answer certain questions. We did this at Christmas time. That's why it's Merry Christmas was Christmas.
Reveal the deep division between him
Oh, we can't hear.
on how to interpret Sharia law.
How do you turn?
Behind the computer, there's a little behind the laptop.
I think I've come from a very...
There's a little blue light up thing. Press the volume up.
And I assume, if I may, that your perspective on, say, the Quran says, السارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما. The male and female thief, cut their hands off. Would you agree with chopping off someone's hand as a punishment for theft?
No, I don't agree with chopping off someone's hand as a punishment for theft.
If an Islamic State existed, should it chop off someone's hand for theft if all the Sharia conditions are met? Please, yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? Please, answer that. Yes or no? I'll tell you my answer. No. What's yours?
On some of my theological views, I'm clear. On other theological views, I'd like to hear what the consensus of the scholars would be. And on other theological views, I'm not made up, sir. Anjan, you haven't had a hair on your body touched by this government or this country. You haven't spent a day in prison. You haven't suffered one bit for your views. You're allowed to sit here right now because of freedom and democracy. In your so-called caliphate, you'd have me killed, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you have me... Am I an apostate that deserves death?
Well, I mean, obviously, marginalised are part of an apostate organisation called the Quilliam Foundation. He's paid by Alan Johnson and Gordon Brown to say what he's saying.
So how many thousands of pounds a year do you get on
this man gets £2 million with his and his organisation in order to fight against some Muslims.
Look, he's asked you two questions. Firstly, under your caliphate, he would be executable, would he?
He would be judged by an Islamic judge, and then after that...
And his second question, did you hear that?
Would be this. How many thousands of pounds are you receiving from the British government every year?
I receive nothing at all from the government. I receive nothing at all from the government. At the end of the day, when you lose an argument, it's very easy.
So he's getting benefits.
Have you had a hair on your body touched by freedom and democracy? Both of you, obviously...
If I'm judged an apostate by a Sharia court judge, will I be executed in your caliphate? Answer that question.
You know very well that you have left the deen of al-Islam because you signed with enemies of Islam against the Muslims.
As a judge,
you have to one of them with them is one of them.
Will I be executed as an apostate?
Well, you know what the asked about apostasy.
This question is getting to Michael Howard levels. You've asked it dozens of times. You're not going to answer. You're not going to answer the question.
This guy is a senior lecturer at universities.
It depends where it is. I've been.
You wouldn't like this country to become a Sharia state.
I don't think it would.
Would you like it to be?
Obviously, I would like to live under Sharia.
And in that, you would condone stoning of adulterers, for example.
No, not necessarily. It's a far bigger issue, Jeremy, than this. You can't just pick and choose bits and bobs of the Sharia. It's a very broad issue. The social strata, the circumstances have to be
so what's the Sharia conditions for stoning women?
This has nothing to do with the education. Let's look at the education.
No, but that's what's being taught in schools. So if the Sharia conditions for stoning the adulterer were met, then is that something in principle we should condone?
It's not being taught in school.
If we cannot sit on Newsnight and openly say that in principle we don't condone the stoning of adulterers or the chopping of the hands if Sharia conditions are met anywhere in the world, then we've got a problem. Because I would condemn that in principle.
This is not what we were here to discuss.
Presumably, don't you? You do condemn the amputation of hands and the stoning to death.
If it's not according to a due process of law in any situation,
So if it's by due process, it's okay to stone people to death.
The fact is that these things are not taught in school.
No, Ibrahim, sorry. If by due process, is it okay to stone people to death by due process?
This thing is not taught in school.
Right. That's what we're here. So if in a Islamic state, with the Sharia conditions all being perfect, in principle,
all of these things are on national TV.
Right? Do you, with Sharia conditions being present in the Islamic State, condemn stoning women who are adulteresses to death?
Yes or no? No, there is no yes or no answer. Can I ask you? Can I ask
ask him a question? Can I ask him a question? Likewise, Margin. Can I
Why is there no yes or no answer? No. Nicky, can we get an answer? I answered his question. Can we not get an answer?
He
Do not let us get away with no answer. I answered his question.
Wait.
Yeah.
The truth.
I want to know.
You have to.
Are you going to answer yes or no?
No, there's no yes or no answer to this question.
When will it be okay and accepted to be gay in Islam? That is not, it's a loaded question, but I'm sorry. You either be gay or you be Muslim. No one is forcing you to be Muslim. No one is forcing you.
I mean, I will speak out and continue to speak out, and you're right to identify however you want, because what we're hearing right now is, and you guys can also think whatever you want, the danger with literalism is in insisting that there is only one interpretation or one way of doing things. If we take that literally, if we take literalism literally, then only 200 years ago, slavery was accepted and justified by religion. Let me finish. The Quran explicitly and literally, let me finish and make this point. The Quran literally allows for slavery, as does the Bible, but we no longer practice it because our attitudes and interpretations have changed. There is no one Muslim community, there is no one way of interpreting things. If he wants to identify as being Muslim, as this gentleman here said, Abdullah, he said he's not going to tell him he's not a Muslim, and I applauded him for that. He said he's not going to discriminate against him, you just did. And so even he disagrees with
Can I ask you a question, Majid? Do you believe in this concept of an Islamist state? Majid, do you believe in the concept? Because your tweets say you do. And secondly, do you believe in chopping off people's hands when if they...
Hang on, right, let him answer you. Majid, do you agree?
Let's get to another point. So that notion is absolutely ridiculous.
He's a school teacher.
Can I bring you back to Haras's questions, please? Do you want an Islamic state? Do you want a caliphate? Would you, with thieves, chop their hands off? Would you stone adulterers to death?
Okay, if you look at the...
Yes or no, Majid? It's dead straightforward.
This is the international polls that are done by...
He won't ask the question.
Would you like a caliphate, and would you apply Sharia law in all its ways? So we are talking about adulterers being stoned to death, homosexuality, of course, that would be punishable by death, and thieves would have their limbs chopped off. Is that something that you would like to happen?
These terms that you're mentioning are quite loaded.
No, I know, but it's only a yes or no. It's dead straightforward. You said to me, do I support Manchester United? The answer is yes, I do. What's the answer, please?
Yes, the answer is most Muslims will desire this.
So not yes or no?
No, I don't say yes or no to this, but the thing is we need to study what Islam is. We need to study what a caliphate would bring into the world arena. And I think from this, I think most Muslims, including myself, yes, we would support this.
Okay.
Finally, he answered the question. That's it. He's the only one that did. The net result of this was that we were able to, and other things, this is just a little, to start civil society fight backs, to expose people, to shame them, and guess what? More and more Muslims are now joining the fight back after watching things like this, after hearing things like this, and saying, that's not what I believe in. That guy doesn't, I thought that guy was normal, I thought that guy was really good, but if he believes that, that's not what I believe in, that's not what I was taught. So I think it's very, very important. And finally, before we go into questions, Q&A, another report I would really, really advise you to read on our website called In and Out of Extremism, which is really something that I started with at the beginning. And that is, they're case studies of 5 former far-right, Nazis and what have you, people that and 5 former Islamists and jihadists, 2 of them actually in prison right now, that we de-radicalised and brought into the middle, into the centre ground. It's their case studies, their words, why and how, and a number of things came out. One thing that really struck me was that the guys on the far right said they saw some of us on TV, some of us doing lectures or some of us doing various things, and said, we didn't realise that Muslims could be like you as well. All we knew were the guys who were saying kill people and chop people's hands. They're not here in an ideal Islamic state. Okay, so it's not all of Islam. And the guys on the Islamist side and the jihadist side said, we didn't realise that you guys are Muslims as well and that we can be Muslims and be like you as well. That was the starting point. But after that, it took a lot of people. It didn't just take us, it took a lot of people from an academic level, from a scholarly level, from a civil society level to actually help get these people back to a normative position. And that is something that I think we all need to play a part in, and I think, you know, the whole 2 weeks is about anti-Semitism, and I think that anti-Semitism, I know that anti-Semitism is one of the key fuels. We do need to combat that, and I'll leave it at that and just take some questions now. Thank you.
You just turn on the light. So, you guys want to sit around the table, or will it take 2 minutes to sit around the table? Come down. Maybe more can do something. It's up to you. You're welcome to come down. So
Gilbert can't come on down.
The
price is right.
Okay, so I'll take down some questions. Quilliam, you want to speak?
This is wonderful to hear you again. The work is, it's legendary in my circle. And you keep it up. I have a question that's the kinds of confrontations that you are capable of bringing about in the media, in the public domain. They're so compelling and they're so dramatic. I kept watching, and I wonder how many among us here, how many of us think, except on a public television situation perhaps, that even the last bit that could even be brought about on a television program. That kind of a public awareness of the dialogue, the failure to dialogue, the failure to converse. Because, as you pointed out at the end, it's having its effect. You're beginning to show data that indicates it has a genuine effect on people's perceptions of, and among, obviously among Muslims. I kept wondering, I said, could we ever even pull that off in the States, for instance? I don't even, maybe some of my colleagues, or in other countries, where can that be pulled off? I mean, yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, well, yes, I'm going to give you an anecdote of something that's happened here in the UK. This has happened around the world as well. And then talk about how leadership has to come from the top, because if it doesn't, it's not going to happen. I remember in 1972, went to my first football match. I was 7 years of age, and I saw Georgie Best play. And since then, I've been a Manchester United fan. But about 20 minutes before the game ended, we had to run from the stadium. And the reason why we had to run away from the stadium was that the home supporters, even though we were wearing Manchester United scarves, were probably going to beat us up because of the colour of our skin. Reality, racism. If we fast forward to 10, 12 years ago, I took my kids, even when they were young, to football matches, and we don't have to leave. Didn't have to run away. Why? Because there were movements, there was a movement called Kick It Out. Kick racism out of football, or Kick It Out, is how it started. Where politicians, leaders, actors, university lecturers, ordinary people, a whole range of people from a transmedia and from a whole range of activities were able to help shift social norms so that now racism was not acceptable within football matches.
Except against Israelis or Jewish players.
That does happen, but at least I, as an individual in the stands, now I'm not getting beaten up. Which is what the whole origin of it was, to stop racism taking place amongst the fans. That's how it started. Yes, you're right. Yes, that does still happen, especially at Arsenal. It does happen, happens a lot. Still. The purpose of that was that we can shift social norms, but leadership is very, very strong, very, very important. I showed the media because it's powerful. What I didn't show you, what I can't show you, are the day-to-day conversations we have every day, as we have in this social movement of racism. The day-to-day conversations we have at universities, at schools, at home, everywhere. You know, there was somebody in an SS uniform outside, dressed up on a street corner, doing Zeke Heil. Guaranteed, if 20 people walked past him, somebody would approach him. Somebody would speak to him. Ones who might even be wrongly violent, as people will speak to. We need to do the same thing. Which goes back to the leadership. I've got to be honest, Obama's not been very good at this. He's not, in fact, he's been hopeless at this. And I can go into a whole number of reasons. In fact, David Cameron picked him up in the UN a few months ago. Basically, why will you not use the terminology? Why are you empowering? I think one of the things we have to be very, very wary of, first of all, naming the problem, but secondly, what are policies? Actually, the UK does this as well to an extent. We're trying to implement two different policies, one at home and one abroad. Abroad, there's this view that the Muslim Brotherhood is the only the Islamists are the only people that are going to bring stability to the Middle East. As if, and for me, that's the bigotry, that's the racism, the bigotry of low expectations. So that's the only way Muslims can be. But at home, the UK, at least they're trying to tackle Islamists. In the US, that's not happening yet. So until there's leadership, until there is more critical mass and support amongst civil society, it won't start to happen. We're coming out there. You know, we've got some people who are looking to sort of help us set up in the US. We're already an organisation, an entity. But there's the likes of Asra and Amani. There's lots of people in the US who don't have the platform. They need the platform.
I get it. And I just want to reiterate the amazing work that Haras and his colleagues are doing is so central. And I'm going to hammer over the point one more time. I think that we can empower ourselves.
Yeah.
I think we can empower ourselves. I think to put the gaze on Israel or put the gaze on the Arabs and what they're doing or not doing, or Muslims, what they're doing or not doing, that's an important conversation. But what we can do to empower ourselves is study the ideology. As my professor who sent me to Oxford, who taught Stephen Biko about consciousness, he said before I go, he had one important message. He said, when you go to Oxford, remember you're studying the mind of your enemy. And he was true to some extent. We need to study the mind of anti-democratic ideologies and anti-citizenship that uses anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry, and engage it as best we can with our students, and really open the space for us to be empowered to defend democratic principles and to teach our students democratic and human rights education.
And I think it's very clear to note the enemy here is not the individual. The enemy is not the human being. The enemy here is the ideology, in the same way, because it threatens our way of life. And it's not human beings, it's not individuals, it's the ideology, and that's what needs to be challenged. And sometimes, you know, I get some people saying to me, oh, I'm not Muslim, I'm not going to do anything about it. Why should I do something about it? How can I do something about it? Well, how would we have been able to move on from things like apartheid if people who were, different races and different colours and different denominations weren't able to come together and tackle this? This is wrong. How would we have moved on from homophobia if we said, oh, well, only gay people can deal with this? This is a problem for all of us. And Charles is right, we need to empower ourselves because it's something that affects our society as opposed to a Muslim problem, a Jewish problem. I mean, Elie Wiesel once, I remember, was asked, what is a Jewish problem? What is a problem or something that concerns the Jewish community? And he said, anything that affects human rights, or something like that. And I remember that, because at the end of the day, if something affects human rights, if something affects our society, if we don't fix it, nobody else will. If we don't challenge it, nobody else will.
Read first, and then.
As you raised the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood, so I want to address the issue of the fact that in the real free election in Egypt, after the Arab Spring, the Muslim Brotherhood are the majority of win a great, and in Tunisia considered to be one of the secular states in the Arab world in the Middle East. And nada, it's not maybe the same. But I think it raises issue about the relation between democracy and
Good question. Okay, well, first of all, the Ennahda party in Tunisia are what I call post-Islamist. They, in the last few months, 6 months or whatever it was, have separated. I'm not saying don't have elements of bigotry or whatever in them, but they are post-Islamist because they've separated church and state now. They've done it. They are, from an Islamist perspective, a success story.
That's now, not in the beginning.
I know. Let's go back to Egypt. First of all, you're right, the Muslim Brotherhood won the election, but they didn't necessarily win it on their ideas and their views and strategies. They won it because they set up Mubarak's dictatorship. They were setting up the social infrastructure, a bit like what Hamas did in Gaza. They set up the social infrastructure, so people liked them. People who were poor, people liked them because they were providing schooling and education. The ousting of the Muslim Brotherhood, I disagree with. The military coup, I disagree with, because I genuinely believe, had we given it time, civil society would have realised that this is not the right organisation to govern us, because their policies were fake. They couldn't govern. You know, they were great in opposition, they were great at protesting against Mubarak, they were great at saying this, but they had no experience in managing the economy, managing a whole range of other things, so eventually, it might have been a lot more difficult, it might have been a lot more bloodier, but eventually, I believe that either they'd have gone I don't think Muslim Brotherhood, but other Islamist organisations would have gone would have had to go the way of Ennahda, or would have been voted out. The interesting thing is that the Muslim Brotherhood have, in the past, until recently, said that democracy is how they're going to gain power. That's how they changed sort of in the last few decades. There was a fatwa last year issued by official Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt that called for jihad now, combative jihad. So even they've gone back to their own ways now. In Egypt, I think we translated it, might be on our website. Right now, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt are in a state of combative jihadism. So even they right now, at this moment in time, are not using democracy. They tried it, didn't do very well, they were ousted, they shouldn't have been ousted, and now they're going back to what they know best.
Yeah, if I can ask, how do you maintain this day after day? When I first learned we were going to speak, I looked for your name on the internet, and I saw all the bad things people said about you, and I immediately liked you. I figured if there's this moment in Richard Wright's Black Boy, I don't feel it. He hears all these people speaking badly about H.L. Mencken, and he says, H.L. Mencken must be a great writer. But it's just wearying, day in, day out. You know, when you know there's always people who personally, what do you do?
What do I do? I meditate. I go back to the spiritual aspects of my faith. I have a great support base from the family, from my wife and the kids. And I go back to remember one thing, what my daughter said 12 years ago. That's what drives me. Without that, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be earning 90% more salary than I'm currently doing. I'm driving a very flash car like I was doing. But that's what drives me. And there are some days when there are 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and sometimes 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, and then you keep going. That's what drives me. This is my jihad. This is my struggle. And I've kind of accepted that. Dan?
Yeah. You several times mentioned the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And I think this has to do a bit with what we're talking about anti-Semitism here and anti-Zionism. Could you elaborate more how this intertwines, what the importance of this organization is in spreading the ideas, because as far as I know, they're not so much, but they play on the political level and they officially in favor of a two-state solution, but on the other hand, they are boycotting, so they are playing a tricky game. So on other levels, if you could elaborate more on that.
Sure. If we look at the OIC was the brainchild of Said Ramadan. Said Ramadan is the son-in-law of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, and is the father of Tariq Ramadan, who you may have come across. The Scot. Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Forgot where we were. Basically, what they wanted to do was to do 3 things. They wanted to get the youth, that's whammy. They wanted to spread money around the world, Muslim World League, but they wanted to unite what they call the Muslim Ummah. Now, traditional classical Islamic scholars have this disagreement with what is the Ummah. So, for example, and is it a political bloc? Is it a bloc of nations? Is it a bloc of communities? So, for example, if you go to Topkapi Palace and you see one of the first declarations by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the declaration in Medina, where he says this is a declaration between Muhammad, son of Abdullah, somebody else representing the Jewish community, somebody else representing the Zoroastrian community, etc., etc. And he says, we are one ummah. So that tells us ummah does not necessarily mean just Muslims. And if you look at, if I can go into theology, there's an ayah in the Quran, a verse in the Quran that says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَكَ إِلَىٰ رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, which means that referring to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we have sent you but as a mercy to all creation or to all mankind. There are different translations. From that verse, traditional classical scholars used to say that if the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has been sent for all creation and all nations, who is his ummah? Everyone. And the traditional classical scholars used to say, well, the ummah, from a religious perspective, as opposed to a political or a communal perspective, is the world is divided into those who have accepted the message and those who are yet to accept the message. And kafir and all these things weren't defined as they are now. So let's go back to the OIC. What the OIC wanted to do, and have been very, very good at doing, is to, if you look at the different levels, the community, the youngsters, the community fund, and the political level, they've been able to create this block of ummah, make it political, make it Islamic organized, create this new identity, influence the new identity, and work at a political level very, very effectively. To the point where, Muslims in Indonesia, Muslims in Saudi Arabia probably don't regard most of the Muslims in Indonesia as even Muslim. But politically, it serves the politicians' interest to create this bloc, a bit like creating the EU, a bit like creating, the USA, the United States, creating this, but from a religious perspective, rather than a social and cultural perspective, and saying, this is the way you have to be Muslim.
As this organization emerged after the 6-Day War, and with the Omar fire, arson, then what I understand from what you say is that this crystallization of the idea of this interpretation of al-Ummah is allied to Israel and to the conflict in a way that it could emerge at all and not before. So this is the way the things intertwine.
It got stronger after the war, absolutely. It was still sitting as a brainchild, and still sitting in Saudi Arabia as a concept before that. But you're right, it emerged and got stronger after the 6-Day War. What it used...
So there is a chronological, or there is an eternal link between the conflict and
if you're asking me, at the base level, are members of the OIC anti-Semitic? Or rather anti-Israel? First of all, I can answer that the members of the OIC are definitely anti-Israel. I've met many of them, had conversations with them, had these discussions with them. They are anti the concept of Israel existing as a state. Yes, they are. Some of them for different reasons. Some of them for Islamic reasons, some of them for national and pan-Arabic, for a whole number of reasons. But are they pragmatic? Yes, they are. Do they realise that they have to play in the global geopolitics and play real politics? Of course they know. And they are playing that. But the real elements, do they support the concepts of the two-state solution? Yes, in principle they do. Would they rather Israel didn't exist? Yes, even more so. Are they really in favour, the leaders, are they really in favour of, actually, a lot of them, and I won't say who, a lot of them actually said to me, they actually believe in a one-state solution, and that's Palestine. But they live in a world where they believe that, one of them said to me, he said, Haras, when the Quran, when the Prophet Muhammad revealed himself as a prophet, and eventually alcohol, khamr, in the Quran was banned. There's this whole dispute about what is khamr as well, which I won't go, but let's use the word khamr. When khamr was banned, it took 25 years. And the reason why, he said, was because the Prophet knew that to suddenly go to people who were drinking alcohol extensively at the time in the region to say you can't drink khamr anymore, they wouldn't join. They wouldn't join him. So it took time. One of these very senior members said to me once that this is a long-term game that they're playing. And they have to do this slowly. But ultimately, they are anti-Israel. Yes, they are. Are they Islamist? The people behind the organization, the people controlling the organization, are Islamist in the sense that they want to enforce this Islamic identity and an interpretation of Sharia. What they can't agree on is one interpretation of Sharia. That's what will save us. If anything saves us, it's their disagreement on what interpretation of Sharia. But they are building and have built this identity that that's the only way that Muslim countries can get involved at a political level and get involved with Islam is by being part of that bloc. A bit like the lens.
Thank you for the lecture, and they have not quite correct question. I know it will be quite difficult answer. And my question is based on the situation in the Eastern Europe, which don't have any experience, not good, not bad, but any experience to live together with the Muslims. And now, of course, we know this, that Europe has very big problem with the refugees. And the refugees was split between the different European countries. Of course, in all of Eastern Europe, there are quite negative attitudes to these refugees and to the societies. And there are some problems for the politics to explain the people why we need these refugees. If we have only such information that is dangerous, that it's Islamization, and so on and so on. So my question is, in the 2 or 3 sentences, what we should tell for our people that we will be interested to have refugees of a Muslim origin.
Okay, in a very quick sentence.
Okay.
Very quick sentence. The overwhelming majority of these refugees are fleeing from the very people I've been talking about. And they're not from these. You know, they're fleeing from Islamists, they're fleeing from tyrants, they're fleeing from fascists, they're fleeing from dictators. A lot of them don't want to leave. They didn't want to leave. They had good lives in Syria. They had jobs, they had all these kind of things. They don't want to leave. They're fleeing from this. If we don't treat, first of all, second sentence, actually, remember, that's one sentence. Second sentence, I don't know of any refugee that has carried out an Islamist jihadist attack in Europe yet. Everybody, actually no, there is one. There is one.
In Paris.
Yes. But he wasn't. He was homegrown. Yeah. He used it, but he wasn't. He was homegrown. The point I'm making is that every single person, apart from one, there is one actually, but he wasn't a refugee from this. He was a refugee from something. Yeah. Every single person that has carried out an Islamist, jihadist, terrorist attack in Europe has been homegrown. It's been from that country or from the EU or from Europe. That's second thing. So far. Absolutely. Third question, sentence.
Daniel Pearl, LSE educated, but not
yeah. But I mean, attacks carried out here. So, third thing I would say is that how we behave towards the refugees and how we act, because it's a problem. It's not going to go away. It's a problem. Yes, we have to think how we behave and how we react to the refugees very, very carefully, because if we don't, we're going to feed either populist or Islamist agendas. Because if we treat refugees in a particular way, which is against their basic human rights, we're going to drive more and more of them towards what they consider as people, not necessarily ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but Salafis. So it's people who will actually give them, a bit like Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood, who will give them a home, will give them protection. But if we peddle that all refugees are potential jihadists, we're going to feed the far right and the populists. So we're going to drive to it. What is the answer? I don't know. I'm being honest with you. I don't know the answer. This is a huge problem. We are doing a report at the moment which will be ready, I think, probably the first part of it will be ready in November. I've commissioned it, looking at the different stopping points of refugees before they end up in Europe and where they stop, what impacts possibly those different places can have, and what conditions, etc. And then some more follow-up next year. I don't know the answer, but these are the three things I would say straight away.
Because now the things that it's normal people, that is educated people don't work in reality. So it's not no experience, and so it's very, very difficult to explain in reality. So because all these people have all answer, it's opposite opinion. So it's very difficult to change these things.
But one thing we have to accept though is that overwhelming majority of these refugees, wherever they're from, will have different cultural norms and cultural values to us in Europe. So that's a different problem on social cohesion, which isn't necessarily a jihadist issue. That's a different problem, and that needs a lot more work.
And just one quick point, and now Turkey, Erdogan yesterday threatened Europe over the agreement that was made with Europe over migration and refugees. So that's now becoming part of the domestic situation in Turkey, which is changing rapidly.
Okay, thank you for a fascinating lecture. I have just one detailed focus. So you mentioned that Islamists, among them there are 40% people with Asperger's.
No, what I said was that in not, is it on? Is that on? Is the camera on? It's on. Okay. A country in Scandinavia, a country in Scandinavia that we work with, they tested and sort of looked at the mental health of their convicted Islamist terrorists.
Okay.
And they found that in that country, 40% of their convicted Islamist terrorists diagnosed with Asperger's.
Okay. That would be very interesting turn point, because then we would have to deal, we are dealing with something completely different.
Well, we're dealing with people who are taking people with these issues, and all of them, the end, it was whatever reason, a particular manipulation of their illness, to persuade them, somebody had to persuade them that this is the direction to focus your energy.
Yes.
So we're dealing with two things. We're dealing with, first of all, at a primary level, the illness, but then also, at a secondary level, the individuals that are ideologically focusing them towards a particular direction. So we have to focus on both for that particular aspect, absolutely. But from a primary level, I mean, not every single person suffers from a mental health. One can argue that they do, because if they're going to go and do something, then they are on some level, not stable. But yes, there is a case for providing better health care. It's always a case. It's nothing. There is a case for providing better health care for people with mental health issues anyway. But groups like Al-Qaeda and others have been targeting for years.
But this is kind of like hard to control. I know a bit about Asperger, and they're like very easily manipulated, and this is like a long life illness. We don't have
I agree. I'm not a psychiatrist, and so, but that's the reality. That's what's happening right here.
But the number is like huge. It's like significant. It's like,
it surprised me. It surprised me. That particular country is basing on a lot of its responses and its CBE strategy in part to the findings from that research.
So we have 6 minutes and many questions, so Katja, very briefly, and Carl.
It's a very brief question. If you could expand a bit on either what happened or what your counter communications might do on campus politics, with the specific example of the LGBT, because I think that's the one that I think we encounter the most on campuses?
I think that we took it. Okay, first of all, you can either go like that, and there are some instances when we have to go like that. You have to take the battle of ideas forward. What we've also done is a lot of backdoor communications, a lot of backdoor discussions with people who should be natural allies. You know, the LGBT community, once they understand, do become allies. But one of the problems we have right now is that, and this is why propaganda is very important, and I think David mentioned that when he searched my name, he got all these things. Yeah, this propaganda is out there, and I know who started it. His Tahrir, it was the Muslim Brotherhood and their affiliates, and it's there. So what these groups had done is in my name, it's like, oh wow, okay, frightening, safe space to discuss these things. What we did was we actually, I used one of my guys who was responsible for carrying out these activities to go and have these conversations with the heads of these organisations, with these groups, and to explain to them who we are first of all, what we're trying to achieve, what we're not, and why it is important that from a human rights perspective that we work together. That particular society now, which is why I don't mind using their name, is now on site. And they've actually, members from that society have set up a Quilliam Society at Warwick University. So that's one thing to consider. Secondly, in the US, the demographics of, demographics of Muslims in these countries are different to demographics of Muslims that migrated to the US. Here we've got a lot of social economic migrants, and in the US we've got people who are much more intellectual from the Middle East and from Pakistan and places, and went to university a lot more. In the universities in the US, there are a number of organisations that were set up. One, I think, was the Muslim Students Association. ISNA had a whole range of different things. The problem you've got in the US is that, in my experience of doing this for about 12, 13 years now, is the same problem we had here until more recently. But the majority of the Islamic student bodies are Islamists. That's a big problem. Why are they Islamist? Why they've managed to get themselves organised a lot faster. They've managed to get money coming in from Qatar and the Middle East and various places. And the people who are in those associations don't even know what the tenets of belief are of the people who set that up in the strategic direction. These are just ordinary young students who go to university during Ramadan. They want to fast. Outside of Ramadan, they'll go and chase people of the opposite sex, sometimes of the same sex. All the things other people do during Ramadan become pious. And all of a sudden bring on the Israel-Palestine, bring on this cultural identity, they become the joy. The problem you're going to have is that some of these university societies will challenge, will push back, and will call you Islamophobic. The good news is that providing this is done on a human rights basis, providing what you do is not necessarily take the religion out of it and focus on human rights, focus on the totalitarian fascism, on the homophobia, on the anti-Semitism, all these other things. There are enough allies out there that if you want to take this battle on, this struggle, so we've got not battle, let's call it struggle and jihad. If you want to take this struggle on, you can win. We are winning here in the universe. It's starting to shift a little bit. Not necessarily on anti-Semitism yet, but on combating Islamism, it is starting. I don't know if that answers your question. So we can talk offline.
Yeah. Awesome presentation. Thank you, Haras. Two quick questions. Why aren't there more attacks? In Israel, we're seeing people using cars and knives. We saw a niece, a truck, but why aren't there more people grabbing knives and using cars and doing things that would be very easy? But the actual more important question, perhaps, or equally, is when you're combating or trying to intervene. A lot of what Islamism, if I'm not mistaken, gives people is a reason to live, a reason to die, and a reason to kill. And that's pretty powerful for people. And so what I saw up there was a sort of, you're going to cut people's hands off in the future. Oh, it's complicated. When you talk back and intervene, on what basis is that? It's not logical necessarily. It's what meaning. Is there a level of meaning? Are you engaging people on your version of Islam?
On the first one, very quick. It's only recently that it's become harder not to get Kalashnikovs and bombs and create bombs here, you get more bang for your buck. In the past, you got more bang for your buck, more return on investment. You blew yourself up or you started shooting people. It's become harder. So now, I think it was last year, Baghdadi called for this kind of attacks, which have been happening in Israel for a while, but in Europe they were only called for last year by Baghdadi. So yeah, it's hard. How do you stop people from renting a truck? How do you do that? You know, it's not easy, which is why it's very, very important that you get to the ideology beforehand, so you don't have to deal with just fighting the symptoms and you prevent people. Going back to your second question, the de-radicalisation side, yeah, I showed that video to make a point and its impact. The reality is that when we are de-radicalising, the reality is that we in the UK we have mentors that go into prisons and various places officially with the government on some cases where there are dangerous people. Sometimes we don't even tell the government because then we're betraying trust of people that have come to us, but we are all security cleared, etc. So we have the ability. The first thing we do is a risk assessment. Once that's done, we decide which way we have to go. The first thing we do, we call it mentors rather than de-radicalisation. We build trust with the individual. Sometimes the first meeting will happen at a football match. We've had cinema, if that person does believe that it's political, not Salafi, and they believe they can go to cinema. Building the trust. It's all about building a bespoke program that tackles really a number of things. The intellectual, and it's about critical thinking. It's about sowing the seed. It's not about giving them something straight away. The intellectual, the ideological, the emotional, very, very important. The social, and then the spiritual. Very, very quick story if I may. I went to a prison a few years ago and I took a leading imam with me, Sheikh, with me. I did all the sort of political stuff and I thought, he looks the part, even though I could have done it. You know, he wears a turban. I took him with me, even though he worked for me. And he did the religious thing. The warden said, can you come and talk to one of our prisoners? Okay, so I sent him in. He's radicalising other people. He came back out. He went in the same colour as me, came out white, almost. And I made a joke, and I said, Sheikh, did you de-radicalise him? And he went like that. And I leant over and I asked him in Urdu. I said, what's the problem? And he turned round. The guy's got a point. He went in with his version of Sharia. That's what he knew. And the guy said, I'll see you with my version. I'll see you with my version. He claimed to me that he won the version, the battle of Sharia. I don't know whether he did or not, I wasn't there. But then the guy hit him with the intellectual, the ideological, the emotional, and the social. And the Imam had nothing. The best results I've seen of people de-radicalising are people who've made that journey and then come back out of it. In Arabic, quick proverb, the knowledge of books and the knowledge of taste. Knowledge of books and knowledge of taste. Jar of honey, next to Charles and I. Charles will do a PhD on it. The DNA, the molecular construction, consistency, bees made it, etc. Wonderful PhD, peer-reviewed. It's going to sit on a shelf, and 15 people will read it during the lifetime of the book or whatever. I, on the other hand, put my finger in there, taste it. Who really knows the honey?
But you know, there's a Jewish Moroccan tradition where the rabbis take the 3-year-old child and they begin to read the Torah, and they put the honey on the Torah, and they get the child to touch the honey and to lick their fingers. But anyway,
who knows the honey? So the best people have been there themselves.
Okay.
Deconstruct.
So Carlton has a very quick question, like very quick, and then Michelle she's been beaming eyes at me. She has announcements. So we're
okay. Great. Yeah.
Quick,
thank you, Haras. I didn't see you last year because I had to step out as much, so I'm really glad you came back. Just very quickly, I'll divide up my question and just give you the part of it. I'd like to ask you just one part of my question, which was, could you expand on your response to your daughter with regard to her not wanting to be Muslim? And I'm not being sentimental when I ask this. I want us to think pedagogically because most everyone here is thinking about curricula. I'm wondering if you can share something with us which may be helpful for people who are developing their syllabus and who may want to help their students think about how to talk to young people and perhaps even how to talk to children about the world.
My initial response was one of shock. What do I do? What's she saying to me? Once I sort of got over that, I started to, for myself, examine my faith. learn as much about my faith, learn as much about the different interpretations, learn as much about what the problem is. Because if I didn't understand the problem, how could I answer her? So I spent a whole year learning about the problem before I even got to the point where I could say anything to her. Then I found myself a good teacher. I found myself somebody who's passed away since Sheikh Nazim in Cyprus. Again, this Star Wars metaphor, that's what a sheikh who actually learned from Hanafi jurisprudence, but more than that, Sufism, tasawwuf, spirituality. What is a spirituality of the faith? So I learnt about that. And then secondly, realizing, thirdly, that I continue learning. I will always, no matter how many ijazas I get, accreditations I get, whatever, I will always say that I'm a perpetual student. I will never call myself a sheikh. I'll never call myself an academic in religion or whatever, a theologian, whatever. I'll always be a student. Recognizing that you're always going to be a student and this phenomenon is going to evolve. Once I understand as much as I can, then more critical inquiry for my daughter. Asking her to examine this, exposing her to different things, exposing her to different ideas, different views, and more than that, explaining to her in greater depth, over a period of time, because it didn't happen overnight, that you can be a Muslim if you want to be a Muslim in a different way than these people are telling you you have to be a Muslim.
How about for students in universities, young students in universities?
The biggest thing I would say is engage in the critical, understand your subject area, what you want to do, understand it fully, properly, and understand what you want to achieve from it. Critical inquiry, discussion. Critical inquiry is the biggest. If someone comes to you and says X, Y, Z, and you don't agree with it because you've already had a look at this particular read and you sort of understood what it is you're talking about, rather than just saying to them, you know what, you're wrong. Have you thought of this? Have you read this? What do you think about this? Do you think that it's okay, really, to chop somebody's hand off in an Islamic state? Really? And it's all, for me, in students, it's about helping your students engage in constructive critical inquiry to help them form whatever it is they want to form, because that's entirely up to them, as long as it's not an antithesis, it's not dichotomous to civil society and sort of liberal secular democracies, because the majority of us live in those kind of democracies.
So unfortunately we're out of time, but I really, on behalf of everybody here, I have the honour of thanking you, not only for an amazing lecture, but you should have continued energy and strength and success and the vital work that you're doing. And unfortunately, the more, as time passes, it seems the more relevant your work is becoming. So really be strong and good success, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.